Today we're focusing on the new world for independent contractors after AB5. This is this new law that has codified a Supreme Court decision in the state of California. And it's particularly important for new businesses because hiring is such a big important question for how you do it, how you maybe innovate with doing it. Employment law is one of the areas where new businesses get into trouble quicker than others, I would say. And so let's, before I get into why that is, just let me show you the agenda here. So we're going to talk a little bit about hiring workers generally, how employers have to think about that. And then think about this new world for independent contractors. What are the rules that you have to follow to stay out of trouble? And then thinking in the future about risks, general risk, because it's a little hard to tell sometimes whether you should be using an independent contractor or an employee. And I would say AB5 makes it a little easier to tell when it should be one or the other, but it's still always a balancing kind of test we're going forward. And so, as to say, today we're going to try and give you the rules as much as we can, but also, for those folks who are here and then in the future, please do contact us if you have particular questions for your business so that we can help you sort those out, again, for free, because we know that hiring a lawyer is very, very difficult for a new business. All right, well, let's just get started. It is tough for new businesses to think about hiring, particularly because, you're not even paying yourself usually at this point. And so you think about, well, how do I get other people to come in and work with me and help me? Do I have a stable cash flow? Do I have the ability to hire somebody and so that they can count on this kind of income going forward? Generally, that puts you in a difficult situation because you're innovating, you're trying to do some new things, and you think to yourself, well, maybe we can sort of create a new kind of relationship with our workers here that keep them around and happy and good, and yet consistent with the minimal amount of cash flow that's starting at the beginning. It's hard to commit to anything at the beginning to anybody, and most people are looking for not just a month or two of working and stuff like that. There's lots of paperwork to formalize these relationships here. So even if you wanted to, even if you had the money, it's quite a challenge to figure out what kinds of things you have to do. By the way, one handout we don't have, but I can get to you, is what if you do have to do an employee relationship here. There are like 18 things we'll talk about in a few minutes that employers have to do to be in a legal employment relationship. So all of those things are very difficult to keep track of, and so we're going to try and demystify that a little bit for you today. And as we said, who should be an employee, who should be an independent contractor, again, straightened out a little bit more by AB5 here. So let's get right to that. So first thing I would say is, yes, the law, California, IRS, they consider workers to fall into three distinct buckets. Employees, independent contractors, which has now been a little better defined, and then these unpaid workers. Now, we're not going to talk about them very much today. We want to focus mostly on the distinctions between these two relationships. But this is a really important thing to pay attention to, because unpaid workers is a very big source of potential liability for employers if you don't do it right. The tricky part is that, here, give it to you real quick, volunteers can work for nonprofits. Nonprofits use volunteers all the time. It's great, wonderful. Interns are the only ones who are unpaid that can work for for-profit businesses. And in that situation, a for-profit business has to create an educational program for them, make sure that they aren't displacing workers, has to make sure that they don't expect any kind of remuneration themselves. So interns, there's like a 6-factor test, which we can tell you about, that for-profit businesses have to go through to set up a valid intern relationship. And overall, interns are supposed to be a little bit more trouble than they're worth, because they're supposed to be learning, not replacing employees. Okay? So the default of all these buckets is to assume that employee is what you got if you're hiring somebody. And with all those 18 things that you have to do. Okay? So here it is. If you misclassify, you start playing fast and loose with these categories here, difficult. You could get it audited by the employment department or by the IRS. This is probably the biggest problem, is the misunderstandings with the workers who, for example, may work for you and then you say, oh, I'll have to lay you off, sorry, just don't have enough money, and then they go file for unemployment, and then all of a sudden which category you have them in is going to be important. If you put them in the wrong category, that's an immediate signal to the employment department that maybe we have to go back and fix what was misclassified. And this is a new risk that you have here. Now, a lawsuit by an ex-worker claiming misclassification, that is actually strengthened and more welcome under AB5 as an enforcement mechanism. So something to pay attention to, a little worrisome. So let's quickly make sure you're in the right buckets, okay, for your clients here. Let's start with employees. Employees basically are subject to this 17-point checklist of different things that you have to do, and hopefully you're already familiar with some of these different things. You have to withhold wages, you have to respect wage and hour laws, so that when, for example, somebody works overtime, you have to pay them time and a half for overtime, or even more, double time if they go even more hours than just a little bit overtime. You have workplace safety laws. You got to collect I-9s, which are the proof that the potential employee has the right to work in the U.S. You have to do unemployment. You have to do, that would be like an insurance program that you purchase, you pay into to protect when your workers have to go on unemployment. Disability insurance, workers' compensation. A lot of stuff. Now, another thing you should know is that California is an employment at will state. Employment at will means that the employer or the employee can walk away from the relationship at any time for any valid reason, for any legal reason. Okay, so an employer could basically say, look, I just don't like your hair. I'm sorry. I think it's shocking to me every morning, your hair. So I'm sorry, you gotta go. That's okay. As long as they're not saying it's gray hair, okay, which then means that potentially they're saying you're too old. Okay, so then you can't just walk away from the relationship for these invalid categories of discrimination. All right, so why do I say that? It's because generally these relationships, employee can walk away at any time, employer can walk away at any time. Now, what people sometimes do is they try and create a contractual relationship in there between them, so that maybe like your CEO can't just walk away at any time. He has to give you, or she has to give you, a month notice or something like that. That's fine, that's great, but just know that most employers like to keep this fluidity of the relationship going there, the ability to go elsewhere if you need to in a particular situation, and that's because when you hire somebody with an employment contract, you can only terminate them according to the contract. That usually requires some kind of good cause going forward. Okay. Now, the last thing I would flag for you is all those 17-point things you got to do, and we got a list of them that we can give you here. I mentioned a few of them. Payroll services, definitely the best way to keep track of this. Payroll services are all over the place. Even just individual accountants can do payroll services for you. But the main thing is they keep track of all these 17-point things. They withhold money to send to the IRS. All these different things that you would normally have to take time out of your work to do. If you're not an accountant, not a lot of fun to do these things. Definitely use a payroll service if you can afford it. It also is a deductible business expense. You should. Okay. Now, what about the independent contractors? Okay, I'm going to preview for you sort of what has traditionally happened with the independent contractors. They're generally somebody who works part-time, on their own terms, providing their own supplies. I mean, the best, sort of the most traditional look would be a website designer. Okay, website designer, you go to them, you say, well, we don't have a website for our business, how do we do this? And the person says, oh, okay, well, just tell me what you want, pictures, functionality of the website, do people post things, what do you want it to look like? And then they go away and they work on it on their own time, and then in a week or two, you have a new website, and then it goes away. The worker does not need to come in anymore. Yeah, that's a classic independent contractor. situation. And here's a critical part under the new law that was always part really of earlier law. That person really should be in business for themselves, meaning they're not just coming off the street and going, oh yeah, I have some skills on websites, sure, I'll do that for you, and then they go back to being a dog walker. No, instead, they need to be somebody who has a skill set that they're trying to use with other people, that they actually do use with other people. That's the sort of classic independent contractor kind of arrangement. Okay. So here's the standard. It used to be called the Borello test. The Borello test. Okay. It was adopted by the California Supreme Court in 1989. The key aspect of this was that the control of the independent contractor is the determining factor as to whether you have an independent contractor or not. As long as the independent contractor can come in and pretty much do the job without a lot of oversight from you, then independent contractor is what you got. Okay, now here's the thing. These other factors did go into the Borello test here. Here's a real critical one I mentioned on the website design here. It should be somebody who is not engaged in the same stuff that you do as a business. And you are just bringing that expertise into the business. So you got a stocked up brain. Okay, well, do you need to keep a plumber on board all the time? No, you can just call a plumber. They come in, they fix it, then they go away, and then you keep doing your business there. Okay. Then here we go, a few other factors to pay attention to. Do they supply their own stuff? Is the worker sort of purchasing the materials they need to do the job here? You know, these are all factors. This is why I'm pointing out over here. This was always a balancing test. There's nobody who was, oh, absolutely, you are an independent contractor. Absolutely, you are an employee. All a balance of these different factors here. Okay, now this was the Borello test. Why am I showing you this? Because it's still relevant, actually, for the exempted categories of people that are, by AB5, exempted, seen as generally independent contractors. So let's go to that real quick. The ABC test. This is the new standard. But, as the California Supreme Court would say, this has always been the standard. Okay, well, news for a lot of us. But it was this three-part test. Now, you would think that the Supreme Court would be able to come up with an acronym that makes sense here, like A is absent control or something like that. No, they didn't do that. They just said ABC. It's a three-part test. Okay, well, so just remember that A is no control, very little control, just like the Borello test before, okay? And I should point out that C is also sort of the Borello test, which is that they should be in business for themselves. Here's the key part, the new thing that comes in. And by the way, this is referred to by some as the killer bee. At least for Uber, it is the killer bee, because this is the part where the Supreme Court is trying to say, look, gee, what do you hold yourself out to the world to be? You're a daycare center? We have expectations that your teachers are going to be employees, right? Okay. You are offering transportation services. Maybe you're a cab company or something like this. This is what used to be before Uber. Yeah, they're your employees. They could be owners, I suppose, individual owners of their businesses. That's another category we didn't mention here. Just somebody in profit for themselves. That's actually what the independent contractors are supposed to be doing. Okay. But as I said, this part, regular, continuous services of the business as advertised to the public, this is a critical factor that was sort of hidden before the case Dynamex came along and instituted the ABC test, or let's say clarified the ABC test. Now, here are some exemptions. So what happened was the California Supreme Court set forth this in the case of Dynamex having to do with some truck drivers. And then the sense was, since this was applying to everybody in the state, having to do with wage and hour issues, of course, then the legislature took this on and said, well, gee, this has a lot of ramifications. Let's maybe clarify a little bit more who is an exempt category of independent contractors. And so, as you can probably guess, lawyers got on this list real easy, right? Yeah, we look out for our own. This is great. But look at all these other ones that come along. Accountants, architects, engineers, Direct salespeople. Now, here's the thing. The workers in these categories must have all the required professional licenses that go with their particular positions, doctors, insurance brokers, things like that. And now, here's the important part is they have to pass also the Borello test. Okay? So here are some other professional service workers, travel agents, grant writers, artists. Here are some other people, photographers or freelance writers. By the way, these folks really were affected by the Dynamics decision, and the legislature was trying to deal with this because we actually heard of this soon after the decision. Like the Chronicle was no longer hiring people to do independent stories, journalism. Independent journalism is a huge profession out there. So fortunately, AB5 came along and said, well, okay, as long as you are providing content to the hiring entity no more than 35 times a year, then you can be an independent contractor under AB5. But yeah, the ripples through the industry here have been really difficult, and so that's what AB5 has tried to do, is to say, okay, look, some of these sort of traditional people who have been hired, we are actually going to exempt them as professional service workers, but as long as they pass the Borello test too. Remember, you can't control them, and they should be in business for themselves. Okay. All right, here's another exemption. Barbers, manicurists, electrologists, cosmetologists. I always mix that up with a person who does astrology. I think that's a cosmetologist. Anyway, those folks also will be independent contractors if they meet the Borello test. And here's another part. They set their own rates, their own hours. Here's the thing that this sort of sets up here, is that if you're running a salon, really what you're probably doing, unless you're employing them, is you are renting spaces in your salon to all of these people here, okay? So they get to set their own rates, they get to set their own hours, they can book their own clientele, they maintain their own business license. Again, the ABC test will also bring in another group, manicurists, in 2020. So this is another exempted group, again, Borello test, and that means no control and have to be in business for themselves. Another one. Business-to-business contracting relationships. Okay, what would this be? This might be a consulting business. You know, somebody helping somebody with marketing, let's say, or sales in a kind of way. Yeah, again, look for control. Let's see. You look for providing services directly to the contracting business rather than the customers. Business licenses, same thing. Written contract, pretty important thing too. Independent business. Now, again, why am I giving you all of these factors here? Because again, remember, this is a balancing test. So you could actually fall into one of the exempt categories, but still be on the wrong side of things if somebody was controlling you, if you weren't in business for yourself. These are the factors to pay attention to that define whether you were in too much control or you aren't in business for yourself. And finally, construction, subcontractors, same thing, exempt from the ABC test, they do pass the Borello test. And here's a few other things. They got to have a written subcontract with the contractor, got to have their license, of course. They assume responsibility for their work, the liability that they're doing there, of course. And of course, right to control. Okay. So let me see, was there another one? Okay, so here's the tie-up that I need to do. So you remember, we gave you all of these different factors to think about. So if your particular business or employment is not on this list here, then you go back to the ABC test. You might want to take a look at these different factors that, things that indicate a lack of control or things that indicate you are in business for yourself. And just try and get on the balance sheet that is more toward the independent contractor factors than the other direction. So here's the real risk for employers, okay? The California Employment Department always had enforcement of misclassification, okay? The Franchise Tax Board also does, but now the right to sue is also given to all these other people here, okay? Even private attorneys can bring actions to say they have been misclassified. Claims are 4 years for a statute of limitation, meaning somebody could have worked for you up to 4 years ago, even now, I would say, because, again, the California Supreme Court is saying this was always the law. Okay? So right now, if you didn't have the balance sheet like that, you know, more on the side of independent contractor than employee, then you are at some risk going forward that a disgruntled employee could come back to you, or excuse me, a disgruntled independent contractor could come back to you and say, wait, I should have been an employee. I need some back wages. I need some interest. I need some penalties. These are all things that they could bring a lawsuit on. So it's got to be something you got to be kind of careful about going forward. Okay, so just to compare the sort of pros and cons of each of these things here. Remember, employees, good thing is you can control them as much as you want. This is great. Full-time, they can be trained to do multiple roles. You can move them around. You can say, you know, you used to do this, now you do this. They can supervise other people. Yeah, those are great things. Now, there's some problems. You know, cons are you have to supervise them. You got all those 17 things you have to pay attention to. They get like overtime, they get workers' comp, they get all these things, lots of paperwork you got to do. You know, it's not for the faint of heart doing an employee situation. Independent contractors, yeah, here's where you bring in, the specialized knowledge when you need it. You know, you need somebody to fix your computer system. Yeah, you bring in an IT person, you don't have an IT person on site. Bring them in, fix it up, and then they go, okay? You'd have to pay health insurance, workers' comp, any of these things. Now, here's another aspect, very important, is an independent contractor can take on responsibility for stuff that they did. And so, for example, in the law school where I worked, created a whole new wing on the building with a cafe in it and all that. Now, even now, 10 years later, if something happens with that thing, the contractor who built it is on the hook still to take care of the problem. So, you know, you can shift liability like that. But here's the thing, lack of control cannot provide these core services of business. They have to be able to work for others. There's the risks of misclassification too. All right, well, if we got some questions, contact us at this email. By the way, Nolo Press has some really good materials on this you should take a look at. HR California is also an online subscription service for folks to learn about different hiring issues. It's really helpful. So, you know, you have to pay the subscription fee, but we find it very helpful going forward. So, all right, any questions? Alex? So, do contact us if you do have questions going forward. And we'll be here next month with another installment of the legal stuff you need to know as a new entrepreneur, as a new business, or contact us if you have questions.